When the galaxy turned away, they told us that in the face of annihilation, you don't scream, you brace. But no one ever taught us how to brace when your children are dying in your arms and your oceans turn black with ash. Our cities were crumbling, our skies choked with fire, and the very air tasted like despair. We didn't beg right away. At first, we stood proud. We believed someone would help. But as days turned to weeks, as starvation replaced silence and flames drowned our future, pride gave way to pleading. We screamed, not as warriors, but as living tombstones, still hoping for a miracle. We used every frequency, every language, every code and protocol known in the galaxy. Beacons blared from mountaintops. Our last satellites screamed into the void. We broadcast into ancient relay systems, even through black market pirate nets. No answer. Nothing. The Galactic Council remained cold, their delegates silent behind golden walls. The Virex Empire responded only to say we lacked strategic importance. The Kari dismissed our plea as an internal dispute. The Azal offered philosophy instead of aid, extinction as part of natural equilibrium. We begged them all, and all we received was silence or disdain. There was a time when Sarah stood tall among civilizations. We were builders, artists, philosophers. A society founded on peace, not conquest. A culture that believed in dialogue over dominance. And for that, we were soft. When the Skarn came, there were no declarations of war, only fire and death. They descended upon us like a curse, bred for battle, clad in armor forged in hate. We tried to reason. We offered land, gold, resources, even slaves. But they didn't want offerings. They wanted oblivion. Sarah was to be wiped clean, reduced to ash and legend, and we were too late to stop them. We watched as our finest warriors fell without glory, outmatched by creatures who felt no fear, no mercy. Mothers bartered their dignity for a child's breath. Elders wept not because of age, but because their wisdom had no power against brute force. Our oceans became graveyards, our forests burned until their roots cracked and screamed. And still, we sent signals. Still, we cried out, not for vengeance, not for honor, just for help. Anyone, anything. A whisper, a ship, a signal flare in the darkness. But space answered us like a grave answers the grieving, with cold indifference. And then static, a sound we had heard 1,000 times before, a mocking hiss of hopelessness. But this time, the static broke. A voice sliced through it, not synthetic, not translated. Human, raw, gritty, tired and defiant all at once. "We got your message," it said. "This is Earth Defense Command. We're coming." 8 words. 8 impossible, unbelievable, salvational words. For a long time, no one moved. We thought it a cruel trick. Earth? The backwater species mocked across councils for being primitive, emotional, impulsive. They had no fleets, no votes, no power. And yet they heard us. That night, there were no celebrations. Just stunned silence. A flame of hope flickering among the ashes. We didn't know what Earth was bringing. We didn't care. Someone, anyone, had answered. We replayed the message until our systems failed. Then we whispered it to each other in the dark, like a lullaby for the dying. Earth is coming. Our elders tried to temper the expectation. Even if they come, they said, they may not be enough. But for the first time in months, people stayed awake not from fear, but from something dangerously close to belief. Sarah was collapsing, but that voice held something we had forgotten the galaxy still contained: resolve. Not political interest, not economic leverage, pure, unfiltered conviction. It didn't sound like a savior. It sounded like someone who had been here before, someone who understood what it meant to scream into the void and get no answer. And maybe, just maybe, someone who was done letting that happen again. We didn't know what Earth would bring, but in the ruins of what remained, we knew this. For the first time in our history, someone had heard our cry. And they were coming, the human signal. 7 days passed. The sky split open, not with angels, not with fleets clad in gold and song. What arrived were hammers of steel and storms of fire. Earth's ships didn't glide. They didn't dance. They roared into our atmosphere like falling mountains, edges scarred, hulls plated, bristling with cannons instead of banners. There were no emblems of peace, no diplomatic insignias, just one brutal mark carved into every surface, a red and white planet ringed with stars. Earth, the forgotten, the dismissed, the ones who were never supposed to matter. But they were here. And they had come angry. We had expected robes and oratory, envoys and negotiations. What we got were warriors in black armor, faces hidden behind visors, voices graveled and cold. Their boots cracked bones and mud alike. Their suits bore scars, burn marks, shrapnel dents, blood stains both old and fresh. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't wait to be summoned. They stepped onto our ruined capital as if it were a battlefield already theirs. Their leader moved, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. No flourish, no salutes. Just a nod to our elders and a sentence that burned through our bones. We're not here to save you. We're here to fight beside you. In that moment, something impossible stirred. Hope, but not the fragile kind that comes with prayer. This was a dangerous hope, a sharp-edged, steel-spined resurgence. Their presence didn't inspire safety, it inspired fire. They moved like cornered predators, calculated, coiled, unrelenting. And when the Skarn tested them, thinking Earth would flinch as the rest of the galaxy had, they met the ambush with laughter. Laughter. The kind only soldiers make when they recognize pain and run straight into it. What followed was carnage, precise, brutal, beautiful in its defiance. One of our scouts reported seeing a human soldier kneeling among rubble, pulling a half-burnt flag from the debris. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, he kissed it. We asked him why. He looked up, blood smeared on his face, and said, "Because we've been where you are, and no one came for us. That's why we're here." That was when we understood. Earth had not come for glory, not for diplomacy. They had come for vengeance. And in their eyes we saw it. They intended to share it. They didn't ask for resources. They didn't demand titles or gold. They asked us only one thing: where's the enemy? It was not a question born of politics. It was the inquiry of wolves hunting the trail of a threat. Their commanders didn't conduct ceremonies, they issued orders. Their medics didn't heal in temples, they treated wounded in blood-soaked trenches, whispering hope like bullets. Their engineers didn't study from scrolls, they built with broken bones and scavenged tech. There was no artistry, no flourish, only effectiveness, only function, only fury with a purpose. What shook us most wasn't their firepower or their tactics, it was their eyes. Behind every visor, behind every scar, there was something terrifyingly human: recognition, as if every scorched village they saw reminded them of their own. As if every scream mirrored one they once heard on a planet far from here. They didn't look at us like savages to be saved. They looked at us like mirrors, and that made their presence unbearable and sacred at once. Even their silences spoke. At night, when the bombs paused and the fires dimmed, we heard them cleaning their weapons, not resting. We saw them staring into the sky, not in awe, but in calculation. They weren't just preparing for the next battle. They were remembering. They carried the weight of 100 fallen worlds on their shoulders, and they wore it like armor. No one had come for them. So now they would come for everyone else. And somehow, through that darkness, we knew. The Skarn had made a terrible mistake. Earth had arrived, but they weren't here to rescue. They were here to retaliate, with precision, with memory, and with fire. And this time, they weren't alone. Warriors without titles. They never gave speeches. No chants, no hymns, no declarations. The humans just moved, like wind through broken buildings, like a storm trying to remember what mercy used to feel like. When they walked among us, they didn't carry themselves like saviors. They moved like soldiers too tired to care about praise and too focused to be distracted by grief. They didn't wear capes, they wore burn scars. They didn't speak of honor. They spoke of flanking angles and kill zones. Their heroism didn't shine, it bled. One morning, a squad of 5 held the bridge at Saren's throat. 30 Skarn warriors charged it in waves. We watched from a ridge, breath frozen in disbelief. 5 humans, backs to each other, moved as one, covering angles, shifting positions, reloading in silence, their rhythm like war drum choreography. One took a hit in the gut, blood spilling through his armor. He screamed, "I ain't got time to bleed," and kept firing, rage louder than the bullet tearing through him. He didn't survive the night, but the bridge stood. Not one Scarn crossed, not one human fell back. Their leader, calm, surgical, never barked commands. She pointed, she nodded, and her soldiers moved. During one battle, when a Scarn transport tried to flank us, she didn't radio for backup. She led the charge herself. With smoke in her hair and ash on her armor, she detonated the lead vehicle with a shoulder-mounted launcher, then moved to cover before anyone could react. It wasn't showmanship, it was necessity. She never fought for recognition. She fought because there was no one else willing to bleed first. That night, she walked into our command chamber without invitation. Our generals bristled. This was sacred ground, a place of robes, of rituals. She didn't care. She unrolled a tactical map across the ancient table and started pointing. "This is where they're weakest. This is where we hit. If you want to live, follow my lead." Some of our commanders rose in protest. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. "Your way led to graves. Ours leads to fire. Choose." We hesitated, but we followed. And when we did, we began to see what made them terrifying. It wasn't their firepower. It was their thinking, their refusal to fight fair, their hunger to win at all costs. They spoke of ambushes, of ghost tactics, of traps that made the Scarn scream without ever seeing the one who struck. Their plans were madness, but madness worked. In just days, they turned our southern ridge into a kill zone. They fortified it with trenches, mounted guns, snipers hidden in soot-covered ruins. And when the Scarn came over the hills, we watched the humans wait in total silence. No drums, no words, just the steady inhale of killers who'd been here before. And when the enemy entered range, the humans unleashed hell. Rockets streaked, bullets roared. Their cries weren't fearful. They were challenges, daring death to come closer. We weren't used to fighting like this, not with teeth bared and rules broken. But in the chaos, we saw something awakening in us, a memory we didn't know we had. We were no longer bystanders to our own extinction. We were students, and Earth was the lesson. That war was not about honor, it was about survival. One night, I walked past a human soldier sitting alone, sharpening a blade far too brutal for protocol. I asked why he came, why Earth cared. He didn't look up, just said, "Because no one should ever die screaming alone." Then he resumed sharpening. No flourish, no pause. And I realized in that moment, the humans didn't need titles. They didn't want medals. They were weapons with memory. Warriors forged not in tradition, but in necessity. And now they were forging us the same way. They didn't come to save us. It took us time to understand what they truly meant. We're not here to save you. At first it sounded like cruelty, a refusal to show empathy. But then we watched them bleed beside us. We saw them carry our wounded, bury our dead, and build walls where we had only craters. They didn't come to rescue, they came to teach us how to survive the storm. They treated us not like victims, but equals. Not like broken things, but weapons that hadn't been sharpened yet. Their presence wasn't comforting, it was galvanizing. They brought us into the trenches, not just physically, but mentally. Their medics weren't separate from their soldiers. Their engineers were armed. Everyone trained, everyone fought. A mechanic could set a bone and set a charge. A field doctor could stitch a wound and pull a trigger in the same hour. There was no division between healing and hurting, only the question of whether it served survival. That duality was terrifying and inspiring. It rewired how we saw war and how we saw ourselves. One afternoon, a young Sarah boy, leg half torn, lay screaming. Our medics stood frozen, out of supplies, out of hope. A human soldier knelt beside him, no hesitation, wrapped the stump, injected foam that hissed and hardened, whispered, "You're going to make it, little bastard." The boy didn't understand the words, but he stopped crying. It wasn't just medical intervention, it was presence. A declaration, you matter. For a people long abandoned, that meant more than any treaty or promise ever could. The humans didn't give us hope by sparing us pain. They gave us strength by showing pain could be overcome. And they never made it look pretty. They made it look possible. While we mourned, they trained. While we buried, they built. While we questioned, they prepared. Their every action said the same thing: stand the hell up, this isn't over. They rebuilt a destroyed ridge in 3 days, reinforced, rearmed, and baited. Yes, baited. They wanted the Skarn to come, to strike where they thought we were weakest. And when they did, Earth met them like wolves. Hidden turrets howled. Snipers peeled enemies from cliffs. The humans didn't defend, they devoured. 5 held the ridge's choke point. 5 against 30. One was shot through the chest. He didn't fall. He roared and fired until his lungs gave out. Their death wasn't sacrifice, it was strategy. A fuse meant to ignite the rest of us. Their leader, covered in dust and ash, stood atop the ridge like a statue of wrath. Calm. Controlled. She gave orders like equations. When a Skarn vehicle flanked our west, she didn't assign it. She led the charge herself, detonation in hand. No glory, just action. She didn't wait to be revered. She expected results. Her presence made one thing clear: we could die proud, or we could live brutal. And we were running out of time for pride. Later that night, she entered our war chamber uninvited. No armor removed, no rank exchanged. She rolled out her map, pointed at a fortress, and said, "We hit here. Hard. Fast. We don't knock. We break in and burn their spine out from the center." Our oldest general stood and shouted, "This is sacred ground. You don't give orders here." She didn't flinch. "Your sacred ground is a crater now. Either you follow me or you dig more graves." We followed, and we learned. Guerrilla tactics, shock raids, pressure point demolition. They showed us how to fight like we weren't waiting for permission. They didn't believe in fair fights. They believed in endings. And when we hesitated, they didn't plead. They demonstrated. Night after night, they led ambushes, built booby traps with scrap, turned fuel lines into flamethrowers. Every tactic screamed, "This world is still ours." They weren't here for applause. They were here because someone had to be ruthless enough to get results. And by standing beside them, we began to become the same. Not because we wanted to, but because if we didn't, there would be no one left to save. Not us, not our children, not even the memory of who we used to be. When medicine smelled like gunpowder. By the time Earth arrived, our medical facilities were tombs with beds. We didn't heal anymore, we merely delayed death. Our medics worked with herbs and hope, tying off limbs with cloth, trying to soothe pain they had no tools to numb. Our injured died quietly, with no dignity and no chance. We had stopped expecting miracles. Then the humans came. They didn't bring miracles either. They brought efficiency, rage, precision, and care so intense it bordered on violence. Their medics were not saints. They were soldiers with surgical gloves, and they moved like war machines. They didn't flinch at wounds that made us avert our eyes. One human with tattoos of wolves on his arms lifted a boy missing half a leg. He didn't ask for help. He didn't look for sympathy. He wrapped the wound, sprayed it with something that hissed and sealed, and whispered, "You're tougher than half the bastards I served with." The boy didn't understand, but he stopped screaming. The soldier carried him out on his back, still firing with one hand as the next wave hit. That's when we realized they didn't separate healing from battle. For them, saving lives was just another form of combat. Their supplies were limited, but their discipline was infinite. We saw them share doses of morphine, prioritize children and the critically wounded, ignore their own injuries. They operated in smoke and blood, using tech we didn't understand and instincts honed in other wars we'd never heard of. And they never stopped. Even in rest, they worked. They repaired stretchers, refilled kits, recycled everything. Not a drop of medicine was wasted. And when they couldn't save someone, they stayed until the final breath. Not with tears, but with presence. as if to say, "You didn't die forgotten." That kind of care was foreign to us, alien. We had equated compassion with softness. But this wasn't softness. It was steel wrapped in fire, and it shamed us. Not because they made us feel lesser, but because they reminded us what we had lost, what we had surrendered when the war stole our hope. In their battlefield medicine, we didn't just find survival. We found ourselves again, worthy of saving. After one particularly brutal siege, our medics collapsed from exhaustion. The humans didn't even blink. They stepped in seamlessly, triaging, stitching, even cauterizing wounds with field lasers. One of them, a woman with one eye and a temper sharper than her scalpel, barked orders at our soldiers like we were recruits in her own unit. At first our pride resisted, but then, one by one, we obeyed. Because her patients stopped dying. They taught us things our academies never had. How to stop bleeding with battlefield foam. How to keep a soldier breathing with a plastic tube and a vow. How to build a mobile triage unit in a crater using nothing but tarps and ammo crates. They didn't just treat the wounded, they turned medical response into a second front of war. Where they moved, soldiers survived. Where they worked, hope returned. They didn't need applause. They needed results. And they got them. One night, we found a human medic sitting by a fire, blood still on his gloves, staring at his own shaking hands. I asked him, "How do you keep doing this?" He didn't look up, because someone did it for me once, and someone didn't. Then he wiped his hands, stood up, and walked back into the tent where more screams waited. No comfort, no pause, just duty. That was the difference. We treated medicine as mercy. They treated it as vengeance denied. By the end of that week, Sarah's field hospitals no longer whispered death. They breathed defiance. Not because we became better healers, but because we'd learned the human way. Never stop fighting, even when the fight is inside the body. Our wounded no longer prayed for peace. They demanded weapons when they woke. And our medics no longer wept in silence. They stood taller, because Earth had shown us that healing wasn't about easing suffering. It was about refusing surrender. No fair fights, only results. From the start, it was clear. Humans didn't believe in fair fights. They believed in finishing them. When we spoke of honor, they spoke of victory. When we recited old warrior codes, they laughed, not out of disrespect but from experience. Honor, one soldier said, is what people cling to when they're losing. At first, the words cut deep. But then we looked around, at the ruins of our cities, the graves of our children, the ash of our pride, and realized he wasn't wrong. Pride had nearly gotten us extinct. The humans were here to make sure that didn't happen again. They didn't ask for permission. They rewrote our war playbooks overnight. They mapped our territory like predators, marking ambush points and choke points. They taught us how to set traps using debris, fuel canisters, even corpses rigged with explosives. They created corridors of death out of our own streets. They used the very weapons the Skarn had left behind, twisting them into tools of poetic destruction. Their motto was simple: if it moves and it's not yours, break it. One night, they played music through hidden speakers across a ruined valley. A guttural, thunderous roar they called metal. It wasn't just sound, it was psychological warfare. The Skarn patrols flinched, staggered, some even turned and fled, confused by a noise they couldn't place but instinctively feared. The humans called it setting the tone, and they were masters of it. They didn't want to just kill the enemy. They wanted the enemy to wake up trembling, wondering if tonight was the night their nightmares walked into camp with a rifle and a grin. Their commander called it hitting them in the gut. She drew plans not just for strikes, but for statements. When they raided enemy convoys, they left messages. Painted symbols, burned flags, bodies arranged in warning. Not cruelty, clarity. The humans weren't here to follow galactic convention. They were here to remind Skarn, this planet fights back now, and Earth is standing behind it. Even their rest was weaponized. While we recovered from battle with silence and sorrow, They cleaned their weapons, ran drills, sharpened knives, memorized terrain. They never truly rested, because to them, rest was a privilege earned only when the mission was complete. I once asked a sniper when he last slept. He said, "I'll sleep when they stop breathing." There was no exaggeration in his voice, only calculation. When their engineers weren't reinforcing fortifications, they were inventing things, using junk, discarded alien tech, and instinct. One group turned a collapsed tower into a signal jammer, cutting off Scarn communication across half a province. Another wired anti-personnel mines into pressure-triggered chain reactions so complex that one wrong step would decimate entire squads. The Scarn had numbers. Earth had ingenuity fueled by desperation. But not everyone in Sarah saw the value in this brutality. One night, a respected elder stood up in the mess hall, once a Scarn barrack, now a fortress, and confronted our human commander. "You fight like beasts and call it glory," he spat. "You dishonor every warrior who fell with dignity." The room went silent. No one moved. No one chewed. The commander didn't reach for her weapon. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped forward and said, "Your dignity almost got your people exterminated. We're not here to be liked. We're here so your children don't grow up in cages." The elder left in silence. No rebuttal, because there was nothing left to argue. The truth wasn't poetic, it was painful, but it was saving us. Every technique the humans taught us felt like betrayal, until we realized it was salvation in disguise. In them, we saw what we might become, not monsters, but survivors who refused to die politely. They weren't turning us into something else. They were unlocking something ancient, something we had buried under centuries of peace and philosophy. They made us remember that some battles aren't won with ideals, they're won with teeth. And the humans, they had learned to bite first, the memories of those who screamed. We had assumed Earth's fury came from pride or vengeance or duty. We were wrong. It came from memory. Late one night, under the shattered canopy of a dead jungle, I found their commander staring into a flickering fire, a half-empty bottle in her hand. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes unreadable. I asked what happened to their world, why they fought like every battle was personal. She didn't answer right away, just drank, slowly, as if trying to decide whether to let me see what was behind the scars. Then she spoke. "We used to fight each other, for color, for land, for dirt." Her voice didn't tremble. "Millions died. We built weapons that could wipe cities off maps, and we called that progress." I sat frozen. It sounded like madness, like self-destruction, but she wasn't finished. Then something worse came, something not from Earth, something that didn't care who we were, only that we weren't them. She described an invasion, alien fleets landing in South America, cities lost in weeks. Earth cried out for help. Just like us, just like Sarah. And the galaxy responded exactly the same way it had to us, by doing nothing. "They called it a localized conflict," she said bitterly, "told us it wasn't their problem. So Earth bled, alone. Cities turned to glass, families vanished in fire. But they didn't break, they got angry, and they hit back. We lost billions," she said. "But we drove them out. Not because we were stronger, but because we refused to die." There was no pride in her tone, only resolve. It wasn't a story of victory, it was a story of refusal, of a species too stubborn to go quietly. And in that moment, I understood why they came. They weren't here to win for us. They were here to make sure no one else suffered what they did. That night, I didn't sleep, not from fear, but from realization. The rage in their eyes wasn't violence. It was remembrance. It was loyalty to ghosts. Every shot they fired carried a name. Every strike was a memory made manifest. They weren't fighting enemies. They were avenging the screams no one answered. We mirrored that rage. In the next campaign, we launched a triple assault on 3 Scarn communication nexuses. Simultaneous, precise, ruthless. I led one of the squads, paired with a human named Reyes. A scar split his face. He rarely spoke, but when he did, you listened. He moved like a shadow that remembered being fire. and he never stopped scanning, calculating, predicting death like a second language. We breached the first facility at dusk. It was crawling with Skarn. Reyes didn't hesitate. He kicked the door in and opened fire like vengeance incarnate. We followed. Not because of orders, but because something in his silence screamed louder than commands. We fought like him. Quick, efficient, unforgiving. When it was done, we stood in a room full of corpses and shattered machinery. Reyes placed explosives without a word. One less voice for them to scream through, he muttered. By dawn, all 3 nexuses were ash, but the Skarn retaliated with fire from the heavens. One of our forward camps was annihilated by an orbital strike. Dozens dead, many of them Sarah. Some were human. One was a girl named Lexi, barely 18. She used to draw flowers on her helmet and sing off-key during patrol. I remember her because she made even smoke seem lighter. Their commander stood in the middle of the crater, holding the melted remnants of Lexi's helmet. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she turned to her second-in-command and said, "No more defense, no more waiting. We take the fight to their heart." "You're sure?" he asked. "That's deep Skarn territory." "I want them to expect it," she replied. "I want them to dread it. I want them to hear our engines and know exactly what's coming." Then she paused. "And I want every Sarah fighter beside us when we do it." In that moment, we were no longer just survivors. We were not the ones begging for mercy. We were soldiers, under a banner we didn't create, but one we chose to follow. Because it wasn't woven from fabric. It was made of memory, pain, and the sacred promise. Never again. Burning the enemy's throne. The march to the Skarn capital was unlike anything our world had ever known. We were not a people of long campaigns. Our wars had always been sharp, reactive, brief. But now we crossed borders we had never dared approach, pushed into enemy land not out of ambition, but because there was no other path left. This wasn't conquest. It was closure. Our columns moved like storm fronts, with human gunships roaring overhead and tanks grinding through forest and mountain alike. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath our boots, not out of fear, but in recognition. Something irreversible was coming. The journey cost us. The Skarn were wounded animals, and wounded animals are dangerous. They ambushed us in ravines, dropped drones from cloud cover, detonated traps where we slept. Every day we buried more. Friends, leaders, strangers who had become family through fire. We began carrying not names but ashes. And through it all, the humans never slowed. Their pain was silent, carried like ammunition. I found Reyes one night, sitting beneath a shattered canopy, cleaning his rifle with blood-stained hands. I asked him, "Do you ever think about walking away?" He didn't smile, didn't blink. "I did," he said. "Once, years ago, watched a village burn because I hesitated, because I thought peace was still possible. You only have to make that mistake once." Then he kept cleaning. No rage, no drama, just resolve. That was what made them terrifying. They weren't fueled by glory or revenge. They were driven by memory. They carried every death like a blade, and they refused to let it slip from their hands. When we reached the outskirts of the capital, we understood why the galaxy had feared the Skarn. It was a living fortress, a hive of metal and flame, pulsing with energy shields and defensive towers. Drones circled like vultures. Every spire watched us with mechanical precision. It looked impossible, but Earth had heard impossible before, and they had brought answers. Their commander gathered us in the shadow of a ridge. 2 teams, she said. One hits the front, loud, messy, enough to make them overcommit. The other, she looked directly at me, we go under. She traced a route through the forgotten tunnels beneath the city, relics from before even the Skarn. A stealth infiltration. 1 shot, 1 kill. "We're not asking for volunteers," she added. "We're making history." At dusk, Reyes and his squad hit the front. Explosions tore the horizon in half. Artillery screamed. Gunships shredded the sky. The Skarn reacted exactly as expected. Every drone, every troop redirected to stop the false siege. They never saw us enter. The tunnels were dark, filled with bones older than memory. We moved like ghosts. Every step was a prayer, every breath a gamble. But we reached the core. And there, waiting for us, was the warlord. He stepped from the shadows like a god made of steel and scars, twice as tall as any of us. His armor pulsed with violent energy. His voice rumbled through the chamber. "You bring insects to challenge an empire?" His blade was the size of a man. His presence was a sentence of death. But the commander didn't flinch. She raised her rifle and said, calm as ever, "No, we bring punishment." What followed wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. He charged. Columns crumbled. Bullets sparked off his armor like dust. He swatted warriors aside like flies. His blade cleaved stone and bone with equal ease. Nothing slowed him. Not fire, not pain, not even explosives. Until he stepped forward, and something clicked. The mine we planted shredded half his leg in an eruption of metal and fury. He roared, and for the first time stumbled. She walked forward, slow, rifle glowing red-hot, no taunts, no gloating, just 3 shots, chest, neck, between the eyes. He collapsed, thunderous and still. We barely breathed. But it wasn't over, not yet. The commander radioed Reyes, static. Then, flank compromised, not many left. We held the gate, you're clear. And then, nothing. Her face didn't break. She turned to us, armed the core. A Sarah engineer hesitated. "If we blow it from here, the entire capital goes." She nodded. "That's the point. No more breeding pits, no more factories, no more archives. We don't defeat them. We erase them." The charges were set. 5 minutes. We ran through burning corridors, smoke choking every breath, dragging the wounded. Above us, the city cracked. Human forces still fought in the streets, covered in soot and blood, shouting through the fire. We reached the evac point. 1 dropship, hovering low, engines roaring. As we boarded, the commander turned back, looked at the city one last time, then triggered the detonator. It wasn't fire. It was light. Blinding. Beautiful. Absolute. The Skarn capital, the heart of their empire, vanished in a single breath. As our dropships soared through the shockwave, the world shifted beneath us. Not just in geography, but in power. For the first time, the Skarn ran. And we were no longer survivors. We were the ones they feared, broadcasting the truth. The Skarn capital was gone, reduced not to rubble, but to light and legend. Yet the war hadn't ended with the blast. War never ends in fire. It ends in narrative. And the humans understood this better than anyone. While the Skarn reeled, Earth soldiers weren't celebrating. They were wiring the skies. Using salvage transmitters, captured satellites, and hacked enemy networks, they did what no one else had dared. They told the galaxy the truth. Not the polished truth of diplomats, not the redacted truth of courts, the raw truth. The horrifying, undeniable footage of slaughtered civilians, ash-covered cities, and children huddled beneath collapsed schools. Then came the resistance, Sarah and humans fighting shoulder to shoulder, laughing in trenches, dying together, rebuilding together. It wasn't a war documentary. It was a defiant message burned into the stars. They titled it, "You Ignored the Cry. Now Hear the War Cry." It exploded across every system. Networks overloaded, pirate relays rebroadcasted it in secret, civilian devices picked it up in fragments. Even planets that had sworn neutrality found their skies flooded with the signal. The Kari, once silent watchers, issued a statement of regret. The Virex, opportunists at best, offered arms and credits. Too late. Earth refused. "We don't need guilt gold," the commander said. "We need a galaxy that doesn't look away." But Sarah didn't wait for permission. The flames lit by that signal ignited a world long considered broken. Tribes emerged from caves with weapons older than memory. Exiled fleets re-entered orbit, guns raised and flags reborn. Former Skarn slaves, beings genetically molded for obedience, turned on their masters. They had watched the humans fight not for conquest, but because no one else would. That simple act of shared suffering shattered centuries of resignation. In the newly liberated Never Basin, a child approached a human soldier. Small, silent, pale from years in the mines. She didn't speak much, just reached out and touched the soldier's scorched armor. You came, she whispered. The soldier, scarred and hardened, crouched to her level and smiled despite the burns. Yeah, he said, we did. That moment was broadcast too, unstaged, pure, and it echoed louder than any explosion. But not all stood in celebration. The commander watched from a distance, her armor dented, her eyes darker than ever. She didn't lift a glass. She didn't share in song. She simply stared into the firelight, her mind already in the next war. When word arrived of a Skarn warlord defecting, she only nodded. When the sacred valley of temples, long thought lost, was reclaimed, she gave no speech. Instead, she gathered us in those ancient ruins and gave a single order. We don't stop. Not until the last chain breaks, not just here, for every world that screamed and got silence in return. And so, we didn't stop. The humans taught us war, but they also taught us transmission, how to turn battle into warning, how to turn pain into purpose. Their tech teams worked day and night, jury-rigging antennas to boost the signal across light years. They spliced enemy broadcasts, took over Skarn propaganda channels, replaced lies with images of resistance. And people listened. Across colonies, across gas giants, across slave worlds, some cried, some screamed, some grabbed weapons. The signal did what bullets couldn't. It awakened the will to fight in those who had forgotten how. The Skarn began to fracture, fleets split, commanders disobeyed, civil unrest spread through their outer colonies. They tried to suppress the footage, but it was too late. It had become a virus, an idea, and ideas cannot be burned. Their empire bled not just from the outside, but from within. And in that bleeding, in that crumbling, the galaxy saw something they hadn't believed in for generations. Consequences. And it all started with a single truth. Someone had heard the scream. We didn't come to be remembered when it was truly over, when the last fortress fell and the last gun cooled. We didn't cheer. We didn't even speak. We stood among the bones of what once was, stunned not by the silence, but by the realization that we were still alive. Victory didn't come with parades or banners. It came in the quiet rebuilding of a world that should have died. Sarah rose not in celebration but in resolve, stone by stone, seed by seed, and always with fire still burning behind our eyes. But the humans? They didn't stay. There were no ceremonies, no requests for land, no demand for tribute. They packed their gear as quickly as they had unpacked it, patched their ships, and prepared to leave as if they were never here. Our council, now rebuilt not by politicians but by survivors, offered them monuments. They declined. We offered medals. They refused. We asked, why? And their commander, still clad in ash-smeared armor, answered simply, because that's not why we came. I remember watching her walk through the ruins of our old capital alone. She paused beneath the broken archway that once held our banner and whispered, "This place doesn't need statues. It needs fighters who don't forget." I asked her, as I had many times before, why Earth chose us. Why not one of the richer worlds, the more influential systems? She looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Because we heard you scream, and we remember what it felt like when no one answered ours." That was the truth. That was always the truth. Earth didn't come to be saviors. They came to break a cycle, to ensure no scream ever went unanswered again. They weren't gods. They were survivors with scars deep enough to feel every wound in others like it was their own. And when they left, they didn't leave behind technology or blueprints. They left behind something far more dangerous. Belief. The belief that we were not helpless, that we could fight, that we could win, that we didn't need permission to rise. Their footprints still scarred our soil. Their armor fragments still shimmered in our dust, and their legacy thundered in our hearts. Across Sarah, something changed. The people no longer whispered. They trained, they fortified, they explored. The screams that once echoed in desperation now roared with defiance. Other worlds began to call for aid, and this time, Sarah answered. We became what Earth had been for us, not saviors but allies, not protectors but proof. Proof that when one world stands alone, it breaks. But when two worlds stand together, something ancient awakens. Some called it unity. Some called it justice. We knew what it was: fire. One day, years later, a child born after the war stood before the remnants of a human gunship embedded in our soil. "Did they really come?" she asked. "Were they real?" And I knelt, brushing dust from a dented helmet left behind, and answered, "They came not to be remembered, but to make sure we would never be forgotten again." The galaxy still speaks their name, in fear, in reverence, in stories that begin with disbelief and end with warning. Earth, the primitive. Earth, the savage. Earth, the reckoning. But we know the truth. They were not myths, they were not monsters. They were a promise made flesh, a vow forged in silence, and a whisper in the dark that said, "Never again."